last year that I was allowed to teach a large first-year physics course, something I had been doing for 20 years, I decided to teach this advanced physics course. Well, a first year, freshman physics, but a real physics course, using this method. And so instead of covering the concept in the book chapter by chapter, we centered on real life phenomena that were of interest to students, and we tried to understand those phenomena by learning the physics we needed, all the different bits we needed for each complicated phenomenon. So I used that approach in the classroom to great success. It was just amazing. I relaxed the grading structure. I told the students, that was completely secondary. What we're going to do is we're going to have fun learning things that you want to understand. And there was there were two TAs involved with me in that course. One of them quit physics and went into education, as a result of observing this. Well, I think she had plans to do that anyways, but she was really amazed by how this experiment succeeded. And it was, a revelation for me in my career. I'd been teaching physics the wrong way for 20 years. And when I adopted this method and actually had full-out discussions in the classroom that were open-ended and that used this approach, the results were phenomenal. And it brought me and others to tears almost. I mean, the students were coming into the classroom en masse. They were bringing their friends. Sometimes they were bringing their parents. And it was just a very exciting experience. And they killed it. They never, after that class, they never allowed me to teach a first-year physics course again. They switched me from large first-year courses, which I had always developed and done, to advanced graduate courses only. And then they only allowed me to do that for one more year before they cut me from all teaching. And then shortly after that, they fired me.
I mean, it's really a dereliction. It's a dereliction of the duty of university administrators, it appears. I mean, university administrators should be encouraging the kind of thing you're doing, but instead they're feeling it necessary to contain and to prevent you from enhancing this learning experience.
Absolutely despicable that they would kill these projects without even evaluating their merit, without even asking me, would it be okay if we send observers into your classroom? Can we do a formal evaluation of your teaching style? Can we evaluate the merits of it? Can we talk to you about what you're doing and is it having some success? Can we talk to your TAs about how they're living the experience? Can we find out more? None of that. They didn't do any of that. What they did instead was, they made the statements, it's obvious that you're crazy, and we're going to stop you in every way that we can.
Well, it appears that they haven't achieved that so far, because you're resisting them, and you're being resilient, and you're showing, Alan Rock, that for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. That you're coming back, and you're not going to tolerate this oppressive approach to university life.
It's funny that you should say that, because, well, actually, I'm not allowed to tell you that, but there's a very revealing email that will be made public at the tribunal this coming week that actually has Alan Rock saying the real reasons that he fired me, and some of the real reasons that he fired me, and it's very revealing. It's very revealing. I think that they expected me to go away. I think they expect that when they fire someone, it's such a blow, and they take away your economic resources, and it's hard on your family, and it's really quite a change in your life, that you're just going to go away. You're going to move to another city, you're going to take another job, you're not going to be resisting much longer. That's what they expect, and that is what happens 99.9% of the time. So yeah, I think that's right. I think I'm the exception.
They messed with the wrong physics professor, it looks like, eh?
Well, we'll see. We'll see. If they suffer the due repercussions of this, then they will have messed with the wrong guy.
Yes. And just to reiterate, Alan Rock was the former Liberal member of Parliament in Canada. He went to the United Nations and changed Canada's stance on Israel-Palestine. And that's evidently why he gets such prominent lawyers and so much power behind him, because he is a factotum, someone who's serving the vested interests that would like to see Canada take certain stances politically that you and I are opposed to. And so, in summary, is there anything you would like to say in conclusion? You know, because I think that this is...
I think that you're right. You know, this is just my opinion, but I think that Alan Rock has survived largely because of his support of Israeli policy. I mean, normally here's a failed politician who had to be sent away because he had been accused of unethical behavior in the media. It was demonstrated by a government assessor and so on. This guy has made every mistake in the book in every ministry that he's ever worked in. He's a failed politician who was sent off to the United Nations to get rid of him. And the only reason he has survived even under the conservative government, I think, is because of his support for Israel. That's my opinion. And his coming into this $500,000 a year job at the University of Ottawa, his being positioned into this corporation, may have been facilitated by contacts of that type. I don't know. I'd like to know. I'd like to research that. You don't have time to research everything. And I note that none of my colleagues are interested in that kind of research.
One kind of help wondering whether Canada, you know, went from having Britain as their colonial master then to the United States in the Cold War, and whether now we're shifting to having Israel as our colonial master in Canada. By the sounds of things, I mean, professors losing their jobs for their stances on Israel-Palestine all the way over in Canada that's nowhere near the Middle East. I mean, that's just unbelievable.
True, but you know, this information and this analysis is not what's going to change things. This gets back to what we were talking about earlier.
Yes.
When professors decide that they're going to stand up for themselves, when students decide that they're going to stand up for themselves, things are going to change. We're just not there yet. You know, there was a big movement in Quebec, the student strike just recently. Hundreds of thousands of students out in the streets, just absolutely remarkable. What will it have achieved? Almost nothing. The government and the student leaders, so-called leaders, worked out some deal that they're going to go back to the students with, and the students are basically going to give up on some half-baked deal. So, you know, students aren't there yet. They haven't understood that they have real power. They haven't understood that in the present context, they don't have to use a labor model. They're the client buying a service. All they have to do is withdraw payment. All they have to do is not pay. All they have to do is have some guts and stand up, and they'll get whatever they want. They just don't understand that right now. They don't want to lose their session, so they're going to go back into the classroom and work all summer to catch up. I mean, how crazy is that? They had everything. They were mobilized. There's hundreds of thousands of them. They could have crushed the government in its position if they wanted to. All they had to do was go further, go the extra mile, be more radical in their techniques, be more persistent, and they would have got what they wanted. But instead, they treated it like an exercise, just an empty exercise where you end up at the negotiating table and you get some kind of deal, and then you try to convince your members to go back to work. But it isn't even work. They're paying to work. I mean, if they're going to use a labor model and go on strike, then for God's sakes, demand a salary. You know, forget that you should be paying. You should be paid for the work you do. It's so clear. So either use a labor model and demand a salary and go all the way and unionize, or admit that you're a client paying for a service and don't pay for the service. Simple as that. Can you imagine if even 10% of students decided not to pay their tuition fees the next semester? What kind of pressure that would put on the government?
Yes, yeah, I find it strategic though that one of their initial protests in Quebec was outside a conference where the Premier of Quebec was discussing the development of the natural resources in northern Quebec. And I thought that was a good way to link the fact that Canada has such an abundance of wealth. I mean, when I emigrated to this country, I moved to Alberta, where there's just 4 million people, of which 95% aren't students. And all this oil wealth, I mean, Canada is the third greatest oil deposit in the world, has the third most oil in the world, and yet the students have to get into an extortionate amount of debt, tens of thousands of dollars, merely to get a basic education. And as we're seeing, that education is increasingly watered down and manipulated.
It's absurd, but the thing is, you can't convince students of this with these kinds of arguments. What you have to do is students have to decide, okay, we're sick of giving our labor for free. We're now employees, and we're going to go all the way with this. We're not going to put up with this anymore. Once that decision is made, that's when you find out if Canada can afford it or not. That's the best way to find out. You don't need to do the analyses. You don't need to have the arguments. You just have to decide that you're not going to be exploited anymore, and go all the way with your impetus to not be exploited. Once you make that decision, it's over. They can't do it anymore. And that's the kind of thing that needs to be catalyzed. That's the kind of thing that needs to come to be real in the mind of enough students that it will catch on. And it's just not there enough. And I think that the way to push this towards that kind of revolutionary change is to always be more radical. For the students who are radical, to be more radical. The students who are less radical, to be more radical, and so on. If everybody just sort of moves in that direction, things will change. But if you're taking on their paradigm to manage yourself, you're not going anywhere. You're in a...
Yeah, that's true. I mean, I think that's what's so sad is so many students are in a prison because they realize if they fit inside the box and go along with the agenda that they're required to do, that it might be good for their career, but invariably it's a dream and a fantasy, because in a hierarchical society only a very small fraction of the populace can make it into the higher echelons. And so one thing I see, like with graduate students, is they see these professors high up who have all these grants and travel around the world, and it's kind of like an attractive lifestyle that they have dangled in front of them. And so they censor themselves, they conform to myths, they oppress their fellow students, they get into this kind of rat race. But in reality, the vast majority of them can't even make it into the higher echelons, and therefore it would be more rational for them to follow the kind of prescription that you're offering, you're suggesting.
I don't agree that it would be more rational for them. I think that they would discover their humanity. I think that they would discover their dignity. I think that it would give them something that they can't get any other way. But I don't think it's more rational to want those things. Rationality is a weird thing. You can argue that it's more rational for them to obey in order to have the best possible place within the hierarchy. You can argue that that's rational. So I think we put too much into rationality. We give it too high a place. I think we have to go back into the basics, which is, I will not be oppressed. I will defend myself. I have that personal dignity. I have that kind of self-respect where they're not going to step on me. If we can find that, and there have been times in recent history where a lot of people had that. There were an awful lot of people who were not going to put up with any crap, who were willing to walk off the job because they knew they could go and get another job, and so on. They can't fire everyone, and they can't put everyone in prison. And you just got to follow your heart. We're not at the risk of being killed in our society right now. I think it's about heart more than rationality.